Today I want to show you ways that you can change your tone just by using your hands. So I'm not going to be touching anything on the bass or any recording settings or anything like that. Now this comes from an interview I remember reading with Pino Palladino years and years ago, where he mentioned that there are over 100 ways to play a string, to attack a string, and I just didn't quite understand what he meant then, but years having gone by, I kind of get what he means. And I'm not going to go through 100 techniques. I'm just going to go through a few ways, but I'm not going to use any plectrums or anything like that, just purely your two hands. Now strings, bass guitars, amps, settings like that, that definitely does have a huge impact on your tone. But I think it's quite amazing how many different sounds you can get just by using one setup and different hands. So we'll move on to the first thing, which is hand placement. So this is a 1978 Music Man Stingray, and I've got quite a few basses that do definitely sound different and will respond differently to your playing, kind of depending on where the pickup placement is. So this has just got this Music Man pickup at the back, which Music Man basses all have, these 4 strings. So let's have a little see what we can get with different sounds. So if I play sort of right at the back of the pickup here, you get quite a really nice tight funky kind of sound. If you have a jazz bass, that's kind of the famous Jacko bridge sound. So let's have a go. I'm just sort of improvising around the kind of G minor pentatonic scale here. So get that tight sound. Now if I move right over the fret where the fretboard ends here, play kind of roughly the same thing, similar kind of volume. Now this bass doesn't have a pickup here, but you can already hear the difference in the sound. It's kind of a bit sort of a rounder, warmer sound. That's kind of quite good for playing, you know, ballads and jazz numbers. Very different sound to this one here. And of course you've got everywhere in between those two kind of far points. For me on this bass, if I go any further towards the bridge, it starts to get a little bit too thin, but you know, you can still do harmonics, I guess, there. In fact, yeah, so you get a great harmonic sound if you play between the pickup and the bridge on this bass. So a lot of this is getting used to the bass that you're playing. So anywhere between those 2 points, you're going to get a variety of different tones. So that's the first thing. Second one would be palm muting. So if you just have a look at that part of your hand there, that fleshy part of your hand, if you place that somewhere around about the end of where the strings end by the bridge, you'll have to alter the pressure and the placement. But if you get that fleshy part of your palm, rest it there, and then get your thumb, and then that's called palm muting, you can get this kind of dull, thuddy kind of note, which is really great. Anthony Jackson uses this technique a lot, and he uses different combinations of fingers as well. So palm muting is a really cool, effective thing to do. You obviously don't have to use all of these techniques at the same time. This is kind of applicable to certain genres, certain styles. You don't want to try and shoehorn everything into one song or one solo or whatever. You have to kind of use your taste to guide where you're gonna play this. You certainly can, you know, use a couple of different placements and techniques within one song, but that's kind of ultimately up to you. Next is the finger angle and attack. Now before I get onto that, I'll talk about rest strokes and free strokes, which as bass players we kind of borrow from classical guitar. A rest stroke is just a simple finger style technique where you pluck the string and come to rest on the next string below it. Obviously with the E string there isn't a string. If you've got a 4 string there is no string. to rest on. But that is the rest stroke. You've got your fingers not too straight, not too curled, somewhere kind of in the middle, and that's your kind of basic finger style that many bass players use. That's kind of what I do 90% of the time. I'm kind of playing that way, altering the positions across, you know, from the bridge to the neck. But a lot of these other techniques can come in useful at any time, really. Now, if I alter the angle that I attack the string, you get a vastly different sound. So the angle that you just saw there with the rest strokes, kind of, let's do that again. You get a very nice kind of round, kind of quite clean sound. Now for rock, you could kind of experiment with this kind of thing. Now I'm kind of attacking the string a little bit harder, a little bit more aggressively, but this time my finger is a little bit straighter and I'm very much striking the finger into the body to get, and that kind of clanky sound you hear is the string hitting the fret. So yeah, I'm not going to be playing that in a ballad, but certainly for certain kind of rock styles, that's gonna sound good. And that's just to do with the kind of aggression you hit the string with, but also the angle that your finger is plucking. Okay. Next up, we have left hand muting. Now there are loads of different kind of muting techniques that you have on the bass. Some get you cool sounds, like when you play ghost notes, which is just where instead of pushing down to get a fretted note, you just hold a string or strings and this kind of dead sound. Kind of good for funk styles. There's also muting that you really should learn to just stop strings ringing, okay? But the one I'm going to show you now is left-hand muting, kind of popularized by Francis Rocco Prestia of Tower of Power, who was very famous for kind of 16th note bass lines. And he does this really quite strange but amazing thing where he primarily plays with his first and second fingers, and then with the other two, the third and the fourth, he mutes the string to get this just brilliant, dead, percussive kind of sound. So when you mute on a bass, as we just did with the palm mute, the right hand, instead of a really sustained long note, you get a kind of dull one. Which also pokes out in the mix really well, so it's kind of good if you want to get that kind of effect. So that's how you can do that with this left-hand muting. So I'll just show you what I'm doing. I'll go from the C to the D on the A string, the third to the fifth fret. I'll just use my first finger, and whilst I'm playing, I'm just going to very lightly touch the same string with the third and the fourth fingers. If I touch them too much, I just won't get a note. And obviously if you don't touch it at all, you'll get no muted note at all. So there's a little kind of fine line between those two which you have to find. You just got to apply the correct pressure and stay with this long enough. So for me, it's about there. I moved from 3rd fret, 5th fret of the A string to the D string there. So C, A, F to G. And if you watch Francis Rocco Prestia playing, he does that a lot, where you're seeing quite a lot of hand shifts going, because he can't really play with the little finger because that is required in this muting. So you get that really unusual kind of way to play the bass, but it sounds amazing. So that'd be your left hand muting. Slap is another very popular bass technique, which is very obviously a different kind of sound to fingerstyle. So just if you get the bony part of your thumb, and you get your thumb kind of parallel to the string, and you really bounce off whilst playing right at the end of the fretboard, that's how you get the slap sound. And a bit like the rock technique, you're slapping the string against the fret, which is where you get that metallic sound from. Then the other part of it is the pop, where you get a finger underneath the string and just pull away. That's quite an obvious and popular way of getting a vastly different technique than a fingerstyle one. So now, when I play slap, it's fairly basic. I mean, if you listen to some players like Victor Wooten, it's just really, really incredible what they're doing. Now, what he does is the double thumb technique, which I'll do very slowly because I can't really do it. That's where your thumb, it's a bit like a plectrum. Think of your thumb as a plectrum. Now, when guitarists get ultra fast lines going with a plectrum, they are doing a down stroke, as it's called, on a string, and then an up. A bit like how we would, if we're playing fingerstyle, use two fingers one after the other rather than just one. So it's the same, down, up. And when you do double thumbing, it's pretty much the similar kind of thing as that. So when you come down, again, the angle of the thumb here is a little bit different. You're kind of brushing the string and then coming to rest on the next string, from where you do an upstroke with the kind of back of the thumbnail there. If you look at Victor's bass, there's a massive bit here that's just completely worn away because he's just resting the other fingers here just to get a little bit of anchoring going, just a bit of stability. And you can also incorporate the pulls and pops into that as well. That kind of thing. Now, Marcus Miller does something quite similar, and you know, this is why it's a good idea to listen to lots of players, because clearly these players are borrowing techniques that they find elsewhere. You know, from Victor Wooten looks at sax players, piano players, everyone. He gets his influences from everywhere, not just bass. And a lot of these pioneers in their playing are kind of just experimenting, grabbing ideas from different places and moving with it. So Marcus Miller's thing is quite similar. He does this kind of thing where, again, he's slapping a lot, and instead of having to grab a plectrum or something, he just uses his thumb like that. And really, all it is I say all it is, it's a tricky thing to do, but it's a downstroke followed by an upstroke. And if you want to get this going, the key to this and any kind of technique that you learn is actually to really, 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 really slow it down, which is actually quite hard to do, but get the technique down at a very, very slow tempo and then just build up from there. Something a little related to slap is where you use certain different strumming techniques or patting techniques. So again, yet another slight difference in a tone you can get. So if I just play, it's very similar to the thumb action where you're coming down like that, but instead I'm kind of patting with an open palm. I'm really bouncing off. If you don't bounce off, the strings won't vibrate. Okay, so make sure you do that. Now that's a strumming technique, kind of popularised by, I guess, John Entwistle might have been the first guy to do that, Stanley Clarke as well in jazz, rock and jazz there. So probably borrowed from flamenco players, really. They have rasguedos, I think it's called, and that's just various different strumming patterns that you have with your thumb and fingers. So very, very basically, let's try a few things here with a strumming kind of pattern. You can use the back of your nails here to come downwards this way. I'm just playing the 3rd fret of the G and the D strings with my first finger, just barring it there. It's just a downstroke. You can come up as well. getting those rhythms just by lifting up my first finger to get some cool kind of rhythm. Or you could play a little bit as if you were holding a plectrum, which you would do by putting a plectrum between your thumb and first fingers. If you pretend you have a plectrum and stick your first finger out a bit. Now, someone who used to play a bass like this, Bernard Edwards of Chic, he used to do that as well. So just getting his fingers like that and playing like a plectrum. Now, the difference between... it's quite small, actually. The tones you get are quite different. But what you actually do with your fingers is pretty much the same. Doing a down followed by an up. Again, that's what guitar players would do. And using ghost notes there, which is just lifting off the note but staying on the string. So we talked about rest strokes. There's also something called a free stroke, which is where you do curl your finger a bit, and this time when you pluck, you come away from the body of the bass. Now the tone is a bit thinner and a bit weaker if you do that, but that can be quite good for chords or harmonic. Harmonics are quite tricky to play anywhere away from the bridge, so that's why that didn't sound... they don't pop out there, but again, it's up to you. You can change the hand placement wherever you are. But different finger picking combos are quite popular now. You've got people like Billy Sheehan and John Myung, rock players, who use 3 fingers. Gary Willis does the same in a kind of jazz context. Matthew Garrison does some crazy things, as does Dominic DiPiazza, with, I think they use all the digits of their right hand, and that's just absolutely bonkers. But it's to do with tone, but also facility. By doing that, they can just do one thing and they've played a million notes. Okay, so they could be people to explore if you're interested in that kind of thing. But you can use 3 fingers, which is more of a technique thing than a tone thing, really. So I'll talk about different finger style kind of things. So a little bit of palm muting there, using my thumb on the, where am I? On the 7th fret of the E string with my first finger, and then 2nd and 3rd fingers are on the 7th fret of the D and the G. So a little bit of palm muting and that kind of finger style, using what we call free strokes. Kind of get a different tone that way. Most of what I've spoken about so far is kind of to do with the right hand techniques, but what you do with your left hand is important as well. We talked about the Rocco technique of left hand muting, but there are a couple of things that you can do with your left hand to alter the tone that you play. So if you don't know them already, I recommend that you learn hammer-ons, pull-offs, bends, slides, vibrato. So let's go back to the G minor example earlier. So I'm playing 3rd to 6th fret of the E string, and then 3rd to 5th of the remaining strings. That's a G minor pentatonic just going across the entire fretboard. So if I play something around that using hammer-ons, so I'll go to the G string, 3rd fret to 5th fret. This is what a hammer-on is. So you've got your 3rd finger curled, so not collapsing inwards as you play. It's got to be quite strong, this, to get the hammer on, to get that tone. But there is a difference between 2 plucked notes as opposed to 1 note plucked and then hammered on with your left hand. There's a slight difference in tone. So yeah, that's a slight subtle tone difference you can get from hammer-ons. The opposite of that is a pull-off, where if I play I'm on the 3rd and 5th frets at the same time now, and I have my first finger on the 3rd fret pressed down, my 3rd finger on the 5th fret, and I play the note, and I flick the string down towards the ground. That's a pull-off, which is different, again, from 2 plucked notes. That's a slide, vibrato, and a bend. I'm just using the 2nd and 3rd fingers right under the string, kind of thumb over the top, just doing this kind of squeezing motion to bend the string, which bends the pitch upwards. So that has a real big difference on your tone, what you do with the hammer-ons, pull-offs and bends and all that kind of stuff. There's a technique called legato where you play basically hammer-ons and pull-offs with the left hand. It's got this really smooth kind of sound. So the first thing I did was hammer-ons, pull-offs. So I did a hammer-on immediately followed by a pull-off from the 3rd to the 5th fret of the G string, and then play the 5th fret of the D string, and then go down the string doing the same things. So that was D to A, just in that G minor pattern, okay? And it's more machine gun like if you play just with your fingers. So yeah, hammer-ons, pull-offs, bends, slides, vibrato, those are great for your tone too. Now, as Pino noted in that interview that I read, there probably are 100 or more ways of playing the string. Like, I would say that what I've just been through there is kind of most of the more common types, but really this comes down to just listening to loads of different players and trying to use your ear to work out what they're doing. Now with YouTube you can go on and just be taught what they're doing, which is great as well. So someone like Victor Wooten or Francis Rocco Prestia, they just sat down at the bass and just pioneered these techniques. Stanley Clarke the same, Jacko with harmonics. So a lot of this is just down to sitting down with your bass and experimenting. And we haven't even really, well, we haven't at all talked about what you can do with the plectrum, what you can do with Tony Levin has those funk fingers that he straps to the end of his fingers. They're little drumsticks, and you get a different attack. Plectrum material, you know, Brian May used a coin to play, and that had a unique tone. So there are many, many different ways, and this is without even beginning to talk about strings, what bass you're using, changing the pickup, changing the EQ, the amps, and all that kind of stuff. So you do hear it a lot. Tone is all in your hands. I kind of don't agree with that. I don't think it's all in your hands. I think it's a combination of your hands and your gear, really. And I think it probably is the most important thing, though, is to concentrate on the hands and try your best to make as many different tones as you can. But just to finish by saying that, you know, use these techniques in a restrained way, really. I mean, it depends. It's up to you. Do what you like, really. But 90% of the time, I am living in the fingerstyle world. And, you know, sometimes I'll play at the bridge. Many times I'll be using a P bass and playing somewhere around here. And that's what's called for nearly all the time, okay? But it's good to be able to call on different techniques, different situations will call for that, and it adds interest to the different parts. And especially if you're playing jazz or rock, you will need to play some of those techniques. So I hope you enjoyed that video. Please like and subscribe and share. And if you have any comments, just put it in the comment box below the video and I'll get back to you. Cheers.